In this video, I'm going to show you step by step how to sew the Tate trousers. The sewing pattern can be purchased on my Etsy shop. The link to the sewing pattern is in the description box below. To create the Tate trousers, you will need the Tate trousers sewing pattern, 2 to 2.5 meters of 1.5 meter wide fabric, a sewing machine and optionally an overlocker, thread, denim machine needles if you are sewing with denim, an elastic band which is 2 times your waist measurement, a zipper which is at least 14 centimeters or 5.5 inches long, a zipper foot, 4 buttons, preferably hammer-on denim buttons, and optionally sandpaper or a nail file. First of all, you need to print your sewing pattern, making sure the scale is set to actual size. Then you need to assemble the pattern, making sure to not overlap the pattern lines. The fabric I would recommend for this pattern is a light to medium weight denim fabric. You can, however, also use linen or canvas fabric. If using denim fabric, please make sure to use denim needles. When cutting the pattern pieces out of your fabric, please make sure to cut out one left piece and one right piece. The best way to do this is to cut out the first piece with your pattern piece and then lay your first piece with the right sides touching onto the remaining fabric and then trace and cut it. You will need 2 mirrored front pieces, 2 mirrored back pieces, 2 back waistband pieces, 2 mirrored pieces of each front waistband piece, 4 mirrored pieces of the front side waistband piece, 2 mirrored pieces of each pocket facing, 2 mirrored pieces of each pocket lining, 1 front fly guard, and 1 front fly which needs to be cut with both the right sides of the fabric and the right side of the pattern facing you when cutting. The pattern includes 1 cm seam allowance. We can then start to sew. First of all, we need to sew the pleats into the front trouser pieces. For that, we take the pattern to the fabric piece and mark the pleats onto our fabric with some tailor's chalk or fabric marker. We then take the fabric and fold it away from the center to the side, making the markings touch each other. We do this for both pleats, pin them in place and then top stitch along the edge of the fabric to keep them in place. Once that's sewn, we need to iron the pleats. For this, it's best to pull the fabric and let the pleats naturally create their folds and then iron these folds for a few seconds. I recommend ironing from the wrong side of the fabric just in case it pleaches the fabric. Next, we need to create the pockets. For this, we first of all overlock the inside edges of both pocket facings. The inside edge is the longest edge of the piece. We can then take our pocket lining pieces and attach our pocket facings to them by top stitching them. The lower facing needs to be attached to the lower lining, and the upper facing needs to be attached to the upper lining. The shapes should generally align. We then just top stitch along the edge we have just overlocked. The upper facing and lining then need to be attached to our front piece by aligning both outer edges right sides together. We pin this in place and I chose to overlock the edge. However, you could also sew this with a straight stitch. Next, we need to turn the pocket lining around and top stitch our seam from the outside. With this, we can enclose our raw edge if needed. We can now close the pocket lining by placing our lower pocket lining onto our upper pocket lining and pinning the curved edges together. I overlocked the entire curved edge. You could, however, use a zigzag stitch for this. We can then attach the pocket to the front piece by turning it behind our front piece and pin the pocket edge at the side and the top of the front piece and then top stitch it down. And with that, our pocket is done. We of course repeat the same steps for the other front piece too. Now it's time to fit the front fly zipper. For this, we first overlock the crotch seams on both front pieces. Both front pieces need to be right sides together. We then take our front fly pattern piece and line it up with the top edge of our front pieces and pin where the front fly pattern ends. We then need to sew from the lower edge to the pin to close the lower part of our crotch seam. For the front fly, please note that the buttonholes will be on the left side when wearing the trouser. This means we sew the front fly to the right side of the trouser when facing it. The fly guard and buttons will be on the right side when wearing the trouser, so when sewing and facing the trouser, they will be on the left side. This is important to note for the next steps. We need to overlock the front fly and front fly guard pieces. The guard needs to be folded in half before overlocking. We then pin the front fly to the right front piece, right sides together, and sew along the outer edge. I would recommend you stitch the seam allowance onto the front fly. Moving on to the fly guard, we take our zipper and align the zipper top with our seam allowance on the fly guard, which is 1 cm below the edge. And the zipper tape needs to be aligned with the outer edge of our fly guard. We pin this in place and then use a zipper foot to attach the zipper to the guard. Next, we can take our zipper guard and attach it to our left front piece, right sides together, encasing the zipper tape between the front piece and the guard. I would also recommend folding the front fly inside the right front piece and top stitch the edge down. I did not do this at this stage, but I would recommend to sew 2 rows of stitching. Next, we need to attach the other side of our zipper to the front fly by closing the front of the trouser and pinning the zipper from the inside onto the front fly. Before sewing this in place, make sure to see whether the trouser closes nicely without any pulling. You can top stitch this from the outside. I would, however, recommend to only attach the zipper to the front fly at this stage. Next, we need to top stitch the front fly from the outside, and for this I again recommend using the pattern piece as guidance. Please make sure to fold away the seam allowance for this. Aligning the seam allowance edge with my fabric, I then use chalk to draw the front fly shape onto my trousers. We can then go ahead and top stitch this, but we do need to make sure that the fly guard is folded to the other side of our trousers. My zipper was a little too long, so I also cut my zipper to be shorter. Lastly, I top stitched the crotch seam with 2 rows of stitching, which I then also did for the front fly. Now moving on to the back pieces. We again overlock the crotch curves. We then place both back pieces right sides together and attach them to each other along the crotch seam. I again top stitch my seam with 2 rows of stitching, making sure to catch the seam allowance folded to the left. This is important so that the stitching matches up with the stitching on the front side. We can then assemble our trousers by facing them right sides together and sew along both outer leg seams. Once the outer leg seams are closed, I again top stitch them, folding the seam allowance towards the back piece. Next, we can close the inner leg seam. For this, we need to align both crotch seams, pin them in place and pin outwards from there. I repeat the same with the inner leg seam like I did for the outer leg seam. I top stitch the seam allowance towards the back piece. Now we can move on to the waistband. The first step is to take the back waistband pieces and sew them right sides together along the top edge. I would then recommend that you iron that seam nice and flat. Next, we need the elastic. I would recommend 4 pieces of elastic, which are about 1 to 1.5 centimeters wide, and in length they should be half of your waist measurement. I like my waistbands to sit tightly, so I did make my elastics about 1 to 2 centimeters shorter than half my waist measurement. Next, we need to split our back waistband pieces into 8ths. For this, I'm measuring the width of my elastic and then marking that width 7 times onto the back piece. I mark these lines onto my waistband piece and then top stitch them down. For 4 pieces of elastic, you need 7 rows of stitching. This is creating the channels for our elastic. We then need to feed our elastic through every other channel, starting with the very top channel. You can use a safety pin to feed the elastic through the channel, and once the elastic is flush with the side of the waistband, we need to pin the elastic down onto the fabric. I would recommend to use at least 2 pins for this. Once the elastic is through to the other end, we also pin the elastic down to this end of the waistband. We then continue this with the 3 other pieces of elastic, however, we skip a channel between each elastic. Our waistband piece should then look like it's been shirred like this. To secure the elastics in place, we need to top stitch the sides of our waistband down. The ends of the elastic should be peeking out the sides of the elastic like so. Now moving on to the front waistband. First of all, we need to attach the front side waistband pieces to the front waistband pieces. We then need to top stitch the seams, making sure to fold the seam allowance towards the sides and stitch it down. Once that's done, we can attach the right waistband pieces and the left waistband pieces to each other by sewing them right sides together along the top edge. Next, we can join the back and front pieces together by folding the right and left waistband pieces over the back piece with the right sides touching. We repeat this for the other side too. This then leaves us with this really clean looking edge. To attach the waistband to the trousers, we pin the shorter side of the waistband to the side of our trouser with a zipper fly right sides together. We pin the entire waistband onto our trousers, making sure that our side seams align. For the elastic part of the waistband, we need to find the center of our back waistband piece and then pin this to the back crotch seam. We then sew all around the waistband, and for the back piece we need to be pulling on the elastic to make it match up with the width of the trouser. Next, we need to close the front side openings of our waistband. For this, we fold the inside lining over the outside part and sew the inner seam shut. We also need to cut the corner of the seam allowance so that the fabric is less bulky. It is important to stitch all the way down the side seams and close them off completely. Next, we turn the trousers inside out so it's easier to finish the inside seam. For this, we simply fold over the raw waistband edge on the inside and pin it down. Because we will top stitch this from the outside of the trousers, I found it easiest to pin the waistband edge from the inside, then take another pin and pin again from the outside, so I could then remove the pin from the inside. Once it's all pinned, we turn the trouser right sides out again and then top stitch this down. Should some raw edges fold outwards again, I simply pin them down again and catch them by stitching in the ditch from the outside. This then leaves us with a beautiful waistband and no raw edges showing. Next, I simply top stitch the corners of my waistband. We can now work on the buttons. I decided to use hammer-on denim buttons. To make the buttonholes, I used my buttons as reference. We need to place the buttons equally apart and mark the sides of the buttons onto the right waistband piece. We then create the buttonhole along our markings. For this, I recommend following the instructions of your sewing machine. The buttonholes then need to be seam ripped open and some of the threads need to be clipped off. We can then use a marker to mark through our buttonhole onto the left side of the waistband where the buttons need to go. We then simply hammer in the buttons. Lastly, you can hem the bottoms of the trousers with a rolled or single hem, or you can choose to let them fray if you prefer that look. The very last thing I did was to file the edges of my trousers for a stone-washed look. This is only applicable when using denim fabric. I filed the pockets, the entire waistband seams, the front fly, crotch and leg seams. And with that, we have finished sewing the Tate trousers, and here is the final outcome. I honestly feel extremely accomplished having sewn these trousers. I love the style incredibly much and I'm absolutely here for the street style look. I love how the filing of the denim came out and I love how flowy the pants are while still cinching you in around the waist. I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and the pattern. please do let me know in the comments if you have any questions. And other than that, thank you so much for watching.
Ain't gotta try, this shit come easy when I'm with my slimes, yeah, pop a bean.